before I got enough time to go through this one with you, man. Share the life, share the life, share the life, right? You're gonna enjoy this more than ever. Now we have during the budget presentation, the man responsible for finance said that they were allocating $13.4 billion to GUYSUCO. $13.4 billion. And I say this, GUYSUCO, you put in money into GUYSUCO, you're flagging a dead horse. You are flagging a dead horse. It's all about politics, nothing to do with economics. GUYSUCO is a failed institution or organization, whatever you want to call it, right? And to remind you all, God that has come is the PPP, recognizing that some time ago, they started to close some of those sugar estates, PPP started to close sugar estates. Diamond, LBI, and others, they started to close sugar estates. And it was all good with them. But when the coalition decided to continue that same program, they ball out, they make all satanized, right? But $13.4 billion in this budget. And I am willing to bet that before the end of the year, end of 2026, they're going back to Parliament for more money for GUYSUCO. That has been the trend. I am willing to bet that before the end of 2026, they're going back to Parliament for a couple more $1 billion for GUYSUCO. And then in the budget presentation, I think, in the debate, the Zulfikar talking about mechanization, factory upgrade, and what you say, value added. Well, the only value added I think they can add is the refined sugar. They're going to redo refinery and so on. GUYSUCO is a failed entity. GUYSUCO, because the first thing you got to recognize, the cost of producing a pound of sugar, GUYSUCO cost of producing a pound of sugar is way above the cost of other countries and way above the cost on the market. From the time the European Union removed the preferential treatment to sugar many, many years ago, it was written on the wall, but these people, because they're dunce and because they're only looking at the politics and they're looking, well, by now we all know, many of they depend on support from people who are in the sugar industry, and they believe that those people, they believe, now I'm saying so, they believe that the people don't have understanding and they're dunce and they're backward, so they can tell them anything and they can believe. But GUYSUCO is a failed proposition, a failed entity. And I have something to play here for y'all. Let me find it. Y'all sit back and listen to what GUYSUCO really, really is. Sit back and listen. Hold on, let me find. I gotta make sure I find. All right, so let me go. Sit back and listen. Listen to this. This is about Skeldon factory and GUYSUCO.
Picture this. It's 2009 in Guyana. After years of construction and hundreds of millions of dollars, a brand new sugar factory is being commissioned at Skeldon Estate in Skeldon, Berbice. This isn't just any factory. This is supposed to be the savior of Guyana's sugar industry. State-of-the-art technology, Chinese engineering, a promise to produce sugar at just 9 cents per pound. The factory doors open, the machines start running, and almost immediately everything starts falling apart. This is the story of the Skeldon Sugar Modernization Project, one of the most expensive infrastructure failures in Guyanese history. Today we're breaking down exactly what went wrong, who was responsible, and why this disaster was, in many ways, entirely predictable. Let's go back to the year 2000. The Guyana Sugar Corporation, GUYSUCO, is facing a crossroads. They bring in Booker Tate, a UK-based sugar consultancy, to help figure out how to boost production and cut costs. Booker Tate does a feasibility study and recommends expanding operations in the east of the country where the climate is better for growing cane. Skeldon Estate gets the green light. Now, here's where things get interesting, and this is important. The study happens in 2000. Construction doesn't actually start until 2005. What happens in between? Well, in November 2005, the European Union drops a bombshell. They're cutting the preferential prices they pay for sugar by 36% over 4 years, starting in 2006. Think about that timing for a second. Guyana is about to lose its financial cushion, the preferential EU prices that have been propping up the industry for decades. And the response is to borrow nearly $200 million to build a massive new factory to increase production. Half of Guyana's sugar was going to Europe. 70% of revenues came from those sales. The EU is about to slash prices by more than a third, and Guyana's answer is, let's go bigger. According to the 2015 Commission of Inquiry report, which investigated what went wrong, this decision may not have been logical and based on sound considerations. Basically, this was a terrible idea. Other Caribbean countries were reading the writing on the wall. Belize, Barbados, St. Kitts, Trinidad, and Tobago, they were all scaling back or abandoning sugar, but not Guyana. Guyana was all in. Here's where the story gets really messy. GUYSUCO needs someone to build this factory. They go through a bidding process. And according to multiple sources, including letters from industry insiders and the Commission of Inquiry, there was a clear frontrunner. Walchand Nagar Industries Limited from India. Walchand Nagar wasn't some fly-by-night operation. This company had built more than 40 sugar factories with 300 ton per hour capacity worldwide. They were an original equipment manufacturer. They knew sugar. They had the experience. And their bid was actually lower, about $15 million less than what Guyana ultimately paid. But Walchand Nagar didn't get the contract. Instead, the job went to China National Technology Import and Export Corporation, CNTIC, a company that had never built a sugar factory before, not one. They weren't even a manufacturer of sugar factory components. They were essentially middlemen who would have to source parts from different suppliers. And who made this decision? According to multiple sources, including testimony from GUYSUCO insiders, President Barha Jagdeo personally overruled the board's preference for Walchand Nagar and went with CNTIC. Let that sink in. An experienced Indian company with a proven track record rejected. A Chinese contractor with zero sugar factory experience hired for more money. The Commission of Inquiry would later state plainly, given the poor performance of the Chinese company selected, CNTIC, for the Skeldon factory project, on looking back, it was not a good decision. Problems plagued the project, and many technical and operational problems could not be resolved by CNTIC. They added that a contractor from Brazil or India might have been a better choice.
In 2017, after years of losses, the APNU plus AFC government closed 4 sugar estates: Skeldon, Rose Hall, Enmore, and Wales. About 7,000 workers lost their jobs, with roughly 1,830 from Skeldon alone. The PPPC went ballistic, accusing the government of destroying the industry and firing workers for political reasons. But by then, the damage had already been done, mostly during the PPP's own time in power, from 1992 to 2015. When the PPPC returned to power in 2020, they promised to reopen the closed estates. Rose Hall was partially reopened, but Skeldon? In 2022, Vice President Jagdeo, the same Barha Jagdeo who championed the project in the first place, admitted that reopening Skeldon would require billions of dollars to rehabilitate the deteriorated infrastructure. He hinted at smaller-scale production instead. By 2025, the factory remains closed, the equipment degraded, production at a fraction of what was promised. The factory that was supposed to save the industry ended up helping to kill it. So, here's the question everyone wants answered. Was this project doomed from the start? The answer is complicated, but largely, yes. Economic factors. The timing was catastrophically bad. The EU announced preferential price cuts in November 2005. Construction started in 2005. This was expanding production at exactly the moment when the economic case for expansion collapsed. The World Bank itself noted that Guyana pursued the project on the assumption that, even without preferential prices, the sugar industry could survive if operational efficiency was improved and production costs were lowered. But the factory increased costs instead of lowering them. Wrong contractor. Choosing an inexperienced contractor over proven companies from Brazil or India was a fundamental error. CNTIC had never built a sugar factory. They couldn't resolve the technical problems. The equipment was poor quality and parts didn't fit together properly. A more experienced contractor might have delivered a functional factory. Terrible planning. The water supply was never adequate. The cane expansion didn't keep pace with factory capacity. The factory was designed to process 3 times more cane than the estate could reliably supply. Labor shortages were ignored. The workforce had dropped from 28,000 in 1992 to 16,000 by 2001, but the project assumed they could suddenly ramp up cane production. Political interference. This is the big one. When technical experts, Booker Tate, GUYSUCO board members, and industry specialists raised concerns, they were overruled or ignored. President Jagdeo took a personal interest in the project. He vowed in 2010 to personally get involved to fix Skeldon, warning that if the factory failed, then sugar was dead. His interventions were to no avail. Premature acceptance. The factory was never properly certified or commissioned. It was accepted by GUYSUCO officials despite not meeting performance requirements. This removed any leverage to force CNTIC to fix the problems. Drain of resources. By diverting so much money to Skeldon, other estates deteriorated. This created a vicious cycle where the entire industry declined. Could better execution have saved the project? Maybe, if they had hired Walsh & Nagar, if they'd ensured adequate water supply, if they'd refused to accept the factory until it met specifications, if they had listened to warnings and terminated CNTIC early. But even with perfect execution, the fundamental economics were working against them. The EU prices were falling, world sugar prices were low, other countries were getting out of sugar. Guyana was betting the farm on expanding production in a declining market. So, who should answer for this? President Bara Jagdeo. As head of government from 1999 to 2011, he championed this project. Multiple sources say he personally overruled the board's choice of contractor. He took direct interest in the project and made public promises about its success. The buck stops with him. GUYSUCO board and management. They signed off on a factory that hadn't passed performance tests. They accepted delivery despite knowing about problems. Some were later involved in lawsuits, but internal accountability was limited. Booker Tate, the Commission of Inquiry, cited them for supervision of the Skeldon field and factory works that was below expectation. Though they raised warnings, they also bore some responsibility as project managers. CNTIC, they delivered a substandard product, failed to resolve problems, and faced no apparent penalties despite contractual obligations. Political leadership. The decision to pursue expansion in the face of EU price cuts showed a failure of economic judgment across the government. The 2015 Commission of Inquiry laid out the facts, but its key recommendation that GUYSUCO should pursue full privatization within 3 years was never fully implemented. And to this day, no one has been prosecuted, fined, or held financially liable for a disaster that cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars and contributed to thousands of job losses. President Jagdeo, now vice president, dodged questions about the factory's future in 2024, saying the president would deal with this issue. But the factory remains a monument to failed judgment, ignored warnings, and political decision-making that put ideology over economics. The Skeldon Sugar Modernization Project is a textbook case of how not to do infrastructure development. Ignore market signals, choose contractors based on politics rather than expertise, disregard technical warnings, accept substandard work, drain resources from existing operations to fund new ones, make promises you can't keep. The factory cost $187 to $200 million to build, plus $7 million in corrective work, plus annual debt payments that continue to this day, plus uncounted billions in bailouts and losses. It never produced more than 1/3 of its promised output. It never came close to its promised cost of production. It helped bankrupt GUYSUCO and contributed to the closure of 4 estates and the loss of 7,000 jobs. And through it all, the people who made the decisions that led to this disaster have never been held accountable. That's the story of Skeldon, a $200 million bet on a pipe dream, a gamble that everyone except the decision makers knew was doomed to fail, and a warning about what happens when political ambition trumps economic reality and technical expertise.
There you have it, folks. Guys, that is what GUYSUCO is, you know. So when you hear the talking, as the agriculture minister did yesterday, about this modernization and turnaround by 2030, pipe dream. If you are producing at a cost way below what you're going to sell for, what the market requires, how you going to make that profitable? How you going to work? You tell me that. You don't have to be an economist to know that. That if you are producing, the cost of production is less or more, sorry, you're producing at a cost too high. So how come you can't make nothing? You can't, basic shop thing, that if you buy an item for $1, right, and you have to sell it for less than what you buy it for, how you going to make a profit? Unless you're doing money laundering for joke the books. And that is the story of GUYSUCO. They come and I'm glad, I want you to listen to that carefully, because they blame the coalition, but as this story tells us, they are responsible, Jagdio in particular, for this big investment into Skeldon. Was supposed to turn the industry around, over $200 million for a failed project. Tell me, folks, which project in Guyana that Jagdio was involved in has been a success? Which? You tell me. See, they don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear the truth. Which project? That was his baby, Skeldon Sugar Factory. That was his baby, Skeldon Sugar Factory. What has happened? And because of Skeldon, that's one of the main reasons the sugar industry is in the mess it is in every year. And as I've said, trust me on this one. Before the end of the year, the budget this time around is a 13.4 billion by year end. By the end of 2026, they're going back multiple times for more money for GUYSUCO. More money for GUYSUCO. Because GUYSUCO for them now is not about economics. It's about politics. As the narrator said, they're evil with the selection of the company to build the this sugar factory. They went for an inexperienced company, never build nothing. Never. Whereas the Indian company with all the experience is overlooked. And even though the Indian company bid about $15 million less than the the Chinese company. Wonder why? And as the people said, nobody has been held accountable. And again, you got to recognize that when they talk about thieving, they're going to look at the man who thief on 200,000, policeman who take a $5,000, and them is the biggest thieves. But the people who drain this economy of billions of Guyana dollars, no, they are the golden boys. They are the ones who sit there and they talk all kind of thing. And they are the ones who are primarily responsible for the state the country is in. As we said before, they talk about crime. They talk about youth crime. These 13 years old and these 14 and all them committing robbery and all this sort of thing. And they're going to call and they're going to blame the parent, and then they look at the partner, ethnicity and all of that. They don't look to see is them big money that they thief, make you can't put, you ain't got money to put into social programs, intervention, to put them in the straight and narrow way. They don't see that. That that they are responsible when they squander all them billions and billions of dollars. This is money could have gone to assist families. This is the money could have gone to upgrade schools, to have vocational studies to these children and so on, to get them from a life of crime. But no, they don't see that. They're going to blame the parents. They're going to blame a certain ethnicity. Oh, they were thief. The lazy, they don't want to work. That's what it's called. That is what they will tell you all the time. The lazy, they don't want to work. But are they ensuring that the opportunities are there? We spoke on Monday about organizations like the Guyana Youth Corps, Guyana National Service, and places where youths could have gone to learn some skill or something like that. What they have now? What do they have now? With all this money, you think they're thinking about that? You think they're thinking about that? No, they're not doing that. They're not doing, but then they're going to label the people when they have nothing to do, and they go and smoke the spliff, and they go and commit crime, and a teenage pregnancy and all them. They blame all sort of things, right? Yes, the light one. You get how much that fiber optic cable from Brazil to Georgetown, $40-something million. They say the former president's son got the contract. What happened? White elephant. Nothing ever come out of that. Nothing. Look at the Tipui at the pump station. Look what happened there. Even with this Bamia, the school at Bamia, originally 300 and something million, another 100 and something million. I understand recently, in the past 2 months or so, it's only then it hand over. Who is held responsible? Nobody is held responsible for those things. None. And that is what broken up the place. Look, the Heroes Highway, Concussion Road. How much billions of dollars they spent on Concussion Road? Billions. And celebrated this concrete monstrosity. And when the U.S. Secretary of State come and criticize it, then, we got to cap it with asphalt. We are now cap it with asphalt. Another couple $2 billion. And look to see who will get the contracts. Look to see who will get the contracts. So that is what we're talking about. I can't name a single successful project under Barajagio. None. As I said, GUYSUCO is the biggest thing. Pradoville, look what happened to Pradoville. Take private land, take public land and convert them. Preferential prices and so on to them. That is what they are good for. Cat jump the hand. Not only cat, Bengal tiger. Can't Sagi Jarvis. Bengal tiger jump the hand. And they burn Diwali night. They burn the darkest night in the month and tiger jump the hand. So they go for thief. And that is what it is. You call it what you want to call it. It is thieving. Don't ever steal and the embezzlement and fraud. It's thief, the thieving. That is only fancy, sophisticated name for thieving. We in the country know nothing but embezzlement and even we don't even know what larceny. We don't even know about fraud. We know your thief. We know your thief. That is the label we can give you. Your thief. Right? So that is what is going on. Now let me bring in CC. He was out in the studio. He's back in. Let me bring him in if he wants to say anything. I'm sure he has a lot to say about GUYSUCO. Let me give him the opportunity to tell us what you want to tell us about Suko. He countryman like me, so he must know something about sugar. Go ahead, CC.
Yeah, I was out. I don't want to believe again is Pegasus. Maybe I gotta get a Mario to overshadow the Pegasus. But I was commander in Borbies during the latter stage of the construction of that blue elephant that Jack D established. Then when I watched the material that coming in, a whole sort of rusty material, and I can say maybe them was coming to the ocean, and the salt water must hit them and all kind of thing. But Jagdio plunged deep into sugar when the European Union had cut off the preferential treatment. They say, get out of sugar. And Jagdio go billions of dollars into that blue elephant at Skeldon. And also took money from the other estates and pump it into there. Can produce anything. Any Caribbean I think Trinidad and all those places, they cut down on sugar production. Some even close down some of the estates. But we go big. You go big. Project became a cholesterol failure. All the money gone in June, and it's still there. It is not operating as a doubt. They didn't even come off the blocks. And there is it. European Union say, come cut down on sugar. Even some instances get out of sugar. And Jack Diego big, and he had a total failure. I don't want to carry tales out of school, but I was there on many occasions when Jack Dew visited as a commander, and I was privileged to certain conversations, certain frustrating statements that they made about the sugar thing there. But then they said they got to go because it's their workers and it's all about votes for the PPPC, the sugar estates.
It is clear there's all they talked about. They didn't talk about the economics, because any fourth-year student or any high school student in economics will know that given the environment at the time, the European Union decided the concessionary price done, right? You're not going to give you that concessionary price any longer. And therefore, you ought to recognize then that you ought not to be expanding or attempting to expand. Countries, Trinidad, Belize, Barbados, all them pulling out the sugar, and you going head on into something that is failing. Look at your production cost. How you're gonna produce the what will be the production cost per pound or per ton, and then you have to recognize at the same time you're talking about cane sugar with GUYSUCO, but then you have other types of sugar like beet out of India and all of those places that were far more competitive. And no matter what they say, they're talking now about value added. Remember they started out value added some time ago with Demerara Gold, a beautiful sugar, Demerara Gold. That came the packaging in the gold. So you're just selling the raw sugar. You put it in packages and so on. You're selling it abroad, right? Even in the small packets and things where you at breakfast at hotels, Demerara Gold, very popular. Now you're talking about refinery. They're going to add more value added. They're going to refine the sugar. No matter what they do, it's going to fail. No matter what they do. Because back in the day too, I don't know if it's still like that, a diamond, you had the molasses, which is a byproduct, go towards making rum, and molasses used to be shipped overseas. The molasses is the byproduct, right? So I don't know. It's just, I would hope that people like Tony Vera and them will do commentary, because Tony was an expert or is an expert in this thing, will come and analyze this craziness with the talking about GUYSUCO. GUYSUCO is a failed entity. And no matter what they do, GUYSUCO can't come back. They're fooling themselves. And they know that, you know. They know that. And what the coalition did, they can diversify, retrain some of the people, them and all this everything, pay them, retrain them, but no, they're looking at votes. They're looking at nothing else but vote. So even if 13 and they got to come in with the next $7-8 billion this year, so what? That is what they're thinking. 13.4 now. I'm sure I said by the end of the year they're gonna meet up to like about maybe $20 billion into this failed industry. And then Zulfikar Mustafa telling people at the budget presentation that by 2030, in the next 4 years' time, they're gonna turn GUYSUCO around. Turn GUYSUCO, maybe the sign. Maybe we have the word GUYSUCO written, gonna go up there with some cherry picker and turn around the name, not the industry. They're going to turn around the name, not the sugar industry. So we got to understand, because remember, you are in a competitive world market. And unless you can produce at a competitive price, you're wasting your time. And that is exactly what happened. You can't produce at you couldn't compete with Brazil. You could compete with India and all them places with sugar. You could compete. And even back then, you couldn't compete, but because you had this preferential treatment from the European market, your head was above water. But from the time that preferential treatment was removed. It's drunk you drunk in. It's drunk you drunk in. It's basic economics. Me, I know economist. Me, I know mathematician. But common sense can tell you that. Common sense can tell you that.